Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for coming. I'm Dick Samuels, and I'm the director of the Center for International Studies at MIT. And we're all here this evening because John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt have written a very important book, The Israel Lobby in U.S. Foreign Policy. And it's the sort of book that stirs passions and generates vigorous debate, which is a very rare accomplishment for academics. And the fact is, these are rare and very accomplished academics. John Mearsheimer is the R. Wendell Harrison Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago, where he's also the co-director of the program on international security policy. And his most recent previous book, was The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. Stephen Walt holds the Robert and Renee Belfer Professorship in International Affairs at the John F. Kennedy School of Government here in Cambridge. And his most recent previous book was Taming American Power, the Global Response to U.S. Primacy. Now, neither John nor Steve is anything close to being a stranger to MIT forums, and we're delighted they've agreed to return yet again this evening. Now, if this was a normal book talk, put that in air quotes, we wouldn't have an additional speaker this evening. But as the size of this filled room attests, the passions and the stakes run high enough, I think, to warrant departing from the norm. So I've asked Bruce Riedel to serve as a discussant this evening. Bruce also, fortunately, is no stranger to MIT forums, so we're delighted that he's back as well. He's currently the senior fellow at the Saban Center for Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. But he spent most of his career inside the U.S. government, specializing on the Middle East, particularly on Middle East policy, including stints as a special assistant to the President of the United States and Senior Director for Near East and North African Affairs at the National Security Council. He also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Near Eastern and South Asian Affairs. Last year, Bruce was awarded the Department of State's Meritorious Service Award. He brings a well-informed and thoughtful practitioner's perspective to our conversation this evening. Now, in order to allow for maximum time and maximum interaction with the audience, what I've done is ask John and Steve to split the first 30 minutes between themselves, present their views in half an hour, and then ask Bruce to respond in 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the floor, and I'll have additional instructions for the audience at that point. Thank you very much. Excuse me. Then we'll have 45 minutes and an additional 45 minutes. Steve?
I want to thank Dick and the Center for International Studies for inviting us here, and I want to thank Bruce for coming up and offering his comments later. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you for coming. We are looking forward to having a lively discussion. We want to talk about two main questions today. First, is there a powerful pro-Israel lobby in the United States? And if so, how does it work? Second, on balance, is its impact positive or negative for the United States and also for Israel? I will tackle the first question, which is the easy one, and John will address the second. But before I get started, I want to acknowledge how difficult it is to raise this subject and why it needs to get handled with some sensitivity. If we were here today to talk about energy policy in the United States, it would be natural for us to talk about the political activities of oil companies. If we were talking about gun control, you wouldn't be that surprised if I mentioned the National Rifle Association. But when the subject is U.S. Middle East policy and you bring up the Israel lobby, you are reaching out and grabbing the third rail with both hands. Now, that's partly because some groups in the lobby are quick to attack anyone who identifies their influence or questions the policies that they're advocating. But it's also because that discussion takes place in the shadow of centuries of anti-Semitism, which includes bizarre conspiracy theories like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and of course, tragic events like the Holocaust. And that history shapes how we all think about this issue. So if you talk about a powerful interest group that is mostly, though not exclusively, comprised of Jewish Americans, some will think you're saying that there's a secret cabal to control American foreign policy. If you say that media coverage in the United States tends to be pro-Israel, it sounds to some like you're making the old charge that Jews control the media. If you talk about campaign contributions by pro-Israel political action committees, doing what all political action committees do, some people think you're saying that Jewish money is doing something illicit or improper. So I want to make it clear at the outset that John and I reject every one of those anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. For us, the Israel lobby is just an interest group, like lots of other interest groups in the United States. Most of its activities are entirely appropriate and legitimate forms of political engagement. We don't question Israel's right to exist or its legitimacy, and we believe the United States should come to Israel's aid if its survival is ever in jeopardy. But we also think that the activities of the lobby and its impact on U.S. foreign policy are subjects that reasonable people ought to be able to discuss openly, the same way we would discuss any other groups that try and shape American policy on any issue, foreign or domestic. All right, with that as background, the late Yitzhak Rabin once said that U.S. support for Israel was, quote, beyond compare in modern history, and he was right. It's the largest recipient of U.S. economic and military aid, currently getting about $500 per year for each Israeli citizen. Even though Israel's per capita income is now 29th in the world, it is not a poor country like Bangladesh, and it gets this aid even when it does things that the United States formally opposes, like building settlements in the occupied territories. Israel gets consistent diplomatic backing. We almost always take its side in regional disputes, and it's rarely, if ever, criticized by U.S. officials, and certainly not by anybody who aspires to high office. And all you have to do is look at the current presidential campaign, where every major candidate seems to be competing to see who can demonstrate the greatest personal devotion to Israel. The question is why? Now, the usual answer is that Israel is a vital strategic asset and a country that shares our values. But if you step back and view those two rationales objectively, they can't explain why we give so much aid and why we give it so unconditionally. Israel may well have been a strategic asset during the Cold War, but the Cold War is now over. Today, giving Israel nearly unconditional support is one of the reasons we have a terrorism problem, and it makes it harder to address a variety of problems in the Middle East. Again, our problems in the Middle East would not disappear if the United States had a different relationship with Israel, and the United States does benefit from various forms of strategic cooperation. But it's hard to argue that unconditional support is making the United States more popular around the world or making American citizens more secure here at home. On balance, that can't explain why we give it so much help. Second, as for the claim that Israel's a democracy that shares our values, yes, Israel is a vibrant democracy, but so are lots of other states, and none of them gets the same level of aid, or so unconditionally. Plus, Israel's treatment of its Arab citizens, and especially its Palestinian subject, is sharply at odds with American values, not consistent with them at all. Nor is Israel's behavior significantly better than that of the Palestinians. Now, I don't have time to go into lots of detail here, but I think any reasonably fair-minded look at the history of this region, including the more recent histories written by Israeli historians, show that both sides of this conflict have done many cruel things to each other, and neither side owns the moral high ground. Now, please note, I am not saying that Israel behaves worse than other countries do, only that it hasn't acted any better. And so you cannot justify unconditional American aid by saying that its conduct is somehow exemplary. Now, again, I want to emphasize that we think there's a strong moral case for Israel's existence based on the long history of anti-Semitism, and we believe the United States should come to its aid if its survival is at risk. The good news is its existence is not at risk today, and past crimes against the Jewish people do not justify a blank check now. So what explains this unusual special relationship? Well, in our view, it's the political influence of the lobby.